The tape crackles softly as I speak. It's late. The wind's howling outside my cabin. I hadn't meant to record this at first, but it's been a few years now, and it feels like I have to get it off my chest. They won't believe me anyway, and I don't blame them. My name's Ralph Tanner, and this happened in the middle of nowhere, up near the Cascades, just outside of Rainier. Late August, 2014. The heat was still heavy on the air, but the nights were cold. You can smell it. Earth and pine, you know? I was just getting the barn ready for the fall harvest. Everything seemed normal, quiet. But one night I stepped out, checked the crops, and that's when I heard it. The knocking sound. Big, rhythmic. I thought it was some raccoons or deer, but this was different. I swear it sounded like someone knocking on wood. I should have turned around right then, but I didn't. I stayed out there. I shouldn't be telling you this, but it's been years, and I can't forget it. It's still with me. The truth about what happened is still hard to say. I don't know why it took me so long to notice. It was a regular farm, same as any other, and I had my hands full with the usual things. Raising crops, livestock, fixing up the old barn. Nothing too fancy, just good, honest work. It's quiet here, in the foothills of Rainier. People keep to themselves, and I liked it that way. My daughter Sarah would come up sometimes just to check on me, but mostly it was just me and the land. I'd get up early, work until sundown, just living. Life was routine, easy even. Sure, you get your wild animals rummaging about now and then, but that's nature, right? I had no reason to believe anything was wrong until that first night. The morning air was cool, almost sweet with the smell of dew on grass. I remember standing at the edge of the field, coffee in hand, watching the mist roll down from the tree line. That's what I loved about this place. The silence, the simplicity. No traffic, no neighbors close enough to bother you. Just the sound of birds waking up and the occasional elk bugling in the distance. Sarah had been after me to get a cell phone that actually worked out here, but I'd always resisted. What did I need one for? The landline worked fine when the weather was good. And besides, if something went wrong, the nearest neighbor was only 3 miles down the logging road. I fixed fences, tended the animals, and kept the fields clear. That was my world. Small, manageable, predictable. At least, that's what I thought. Looking back now, I realize how naive that sounds, how comfortable I'd gotten in my little bubble of routine. But that's how it goes, isn't it? You never expect the strange stuff until it's already happening, until it's too late to prepare. It started small. I'd noticed some of the crops trampled, bruised, maybe some missing, nothing huge. Just a few heads of lettuce. Corn stalks snapped, like something big had passed through. It didn't feel right, but I told myself it was just deer, or maybe even the elk. You can't expect every harvest to go off without a hitch, especially not up here. The forest's full of critters. Still, there was something strange about the way the soil was disturbed. Deep, heavy footprints. I remember thinking it was a bear. They're big, and they'll mess with your crops, but something told me this wasn't just a bear. The prints were wrong, too long, too wide at the toe. I knelt down beside one, pressing my hand into the dirt next to it. My palm barely covered half the width. Whatever made this had to weigh close to 400 pounds, maybe more. I stood there for a while, just staring at that print, trying to make sense of it. The soil was compressed deep, like the weight had been distributed on 2 legs, not 4. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I walked the perimeter of the field that afternoon, finding more prints scattered near the tree line. Some were partial, smudged by rain or wind. Others were clear as day, pressed into the soft earth near the irrigation ditch. I took a few photos with my old digital camera, thinking maybe I'd show them to the ranger next time he came through. But even as I did it, I felt foolish. What was I going to say? That some giant 2-legged animal was stealing my vegetables? They'd laugh me out of the office. So I kept it to myself. That night, I locked the barn tighter than usual. I checked the chicken coop twice, making sure the latch was secure. The animals seemed fine, though the dog, old Rusty, kept pacing near the back door, whining low in his throat. I let him in, and he curled up by the wood stove, but he didn't settle. His ears stayed perked, his eyes on the window. I remember thinking, dogs know. They always know when something's off. I should have paid more attention. The real turning point came one evening in early September. I was out there, late, fixing up the fence along the edge of the field. My gut told me something wasn't right. That's when I heard it. A knock, like someone hitting a tree with a branch. The first one made me jump, but I thought it could just be wind. Hell, maybe some branches had fallen together. But then it came again. 3 knocks, solid and clear. I froze. I told myself it was a mistake. Maybe the wind. I should have gone back inside, but I stayed. Big mistake. The sound came from the west, where the forest thickens into old-growth cedar and hemlock. I counted the seconds between each knock. 5. Then another set. 3 knocks. Same rhythm, same force. It was deliberate. Intentional. I'd heard about wood knocks before, read about them online when I couldn't sleep one night. People claimed it was how Bigfoot communicated, but I'd always dismissed it as folklore, campfire stories. Now, standing there in the fading light with my hammer still in my hand, I wasn't so sure. The air had changed. It felt heavier, like the forest was holding its breath. Even the birds had gone quiet. No crickets, no rustling. Just that eerie, suffocating silence that makes your skin crawl. I took a step toward the tree line, then stopped. What was I going to do? Walk into the woods and confront whatever was making that sound? I'm not an idiot, but I couldn't just ignore it either. I stood there listening, waiting for another knock. It didn't come. Instead, I heard something else. A low grunt, deep and guttural, like nothing I'd ever heard before. Not a bear, not an elk, something in between. And then just as quickly as it started, it stopped. The silence rushed back in, and suddenly I could hear the wind again, the faint rustle of leaves. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the tree line, and made my way to the house. My hands were shaking when I locked the door. Rusty was already at the window growling. I didn't sleep much that night. I didn't see anything that night, but the sounds kept coming. Not just the knocks, but more. Scratching, like claws or something moving around the barn. But when I went inside to check, nothing. The animals were quiet, nothing out of place. I checked the locks, the doors, even the windows. Everything was fine, except it wasn't. Something was watching me. I didn't want to admit it, but I think I knew then. I didn't want to believe it. People talk about Bigfoot around here, but I always dismissed it. Folk stories. But that night, I couldn't shake it. What else could it be? I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. The knocking sound still echoed in my head. The scratching had been different from the knocks. It was rhythmic, almost methodical, like fingers dragging across wood. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the sounds in my mind. Rusty had finally settled, curled at the foot of the bed, but every so often he'd lift his head and stare toward the window. Around 2 a.m, I heard it again. 3 knocks, closer this time, right outside the house. I got up, grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand, and crept to the window. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I pulled back the curtain just an inch and shined the light out into the yard. Nothing. Just the empty driveway, the barn in the distance, the fence posts casting long shadows in the moonlight. But the smell hit me then. Musky, heavy, like wet dog mixed with something wild and unwashed. It was coming through the window screen, thick enough to make my eyes water. I stepped back, letting the curtain fall, and that's when I heard the footsteps. Not running, just walking. Slow, deliberate, moving around the side of the house toward the back porch. I stood there, frozen, listening to those heavy footfalls on the gravel. Each step crunching, deliberate, unhurried. Whatever it was wasn't afraid of me. It knew I was in here, and it didn't care. The steps stopped at the back door. I held my breath. And then, after what felt like an eternity, they started again, moving away, back toward the tree line. I didn't go back to bed. I sat in the kitchen, with the lights on until dawn. The next week, the tracks were worse, bigger, deeper. I couldn't tell what they were, but they sure weren't anything I'd ever seen. I tried to forget about it, but it wasn't easy. I'd go outside to water the crops, and there'd be more signs. Something was messing with my field, stealing my harvest. It wasn't just some deer anymore. I had a few neighbors stop by and we talked. A couple of them mentioned something strange they'd seen. Tracks too big for any animal around here. One guy even said he'd heard something in the woods at night. Knocking, grunts, things that didn't belong. That's when the word Bigfoot came up. I didn't want to say it, but that night, after hearing about it from the neighbors, I couldn't ignore it. My closest neighbor, Tom Hendricks, had driven up on his ATV that Thursday morning. He'd found prints near his property line, same as mine. We stood in my field, comparing notes, both of us trying to sound rational about the whole thing. Tom's a logger, been in these woods his whole life. If anyone would know what we were dealing with, it'd be him. But even he looked uneasy. He kept glancing back at the tree line like something might step out any second. "You think it's a bear?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He shook his head. "Bear prints are round, clawed. These are more like..." He trailed off, not wanting to say it. "Like what?" "Like a person, but bigger. Way bigger." We stood there in silence, the weight of that statement settling between us. Finally, Tom cleared his throat. "You ever hear the stories about Bigfoot?" There it was, out in the open. I laughed, but it came out hollow. "Come on, Tom, you serious?" He shrugged. "I'm just saying. My grandfather used to tell me about them. Said they'd come down from the high country in late summer looking for food before winter. He claimed he saw one once up near the pass. Nobody believed him. I wanted to dismiss it, but I couldn't. Not with those tracks staring us in the face. Not with the memory of those knocks still fresh in my mind. Tom left around noon, promising to keep an eye out. That night, I heard them again. 3 knocks, same rhythm, same direction. And this time, I saw movement. Just a shadow, but it was there. Tall, broad, moving between the trees. I grabbed my rifle, not because I wanted to shoot, but because I needed something to hold on to, something that made me feel less helpless. I watched that shadow for maybe 10 seconds before it disappeared. And when it was gone, the silence that followed felt heavier than before. I decided I'd had enough. I didn't believe in Bigfoot, no, but I wasn't going to let some critter steal from me anymore. So I set a trap. Simple stuff, really. A few ropes, a net, and a heavy steel cage. Nothing fancy. I figured I'd catch whatever it was, maybe a big bear or something. The next night, I heard it again. 3 knocks, just like before. I told myself I was imagining things, but then I saw it. Out there, in the trees, a shape, big, dark. It didn't move much, just watching me. I shouldn't have been out there, but I couldn't turn away. I'd spent the better part of 2 days rigging the trap near the northwest corner of the field where the tracks were most concentrated. I'd baited it with apples, corn, even left out some bread and honey. If this thing was hungry enough to steal crops, it'd go for easy food. The cage was an old elk trap I'd borrowed from the ranger station years back and never returned. Heavy gauge steel, spring-loaded door, nearly impossible to break out of once it shut. I felt sick setting it up, like I was crossing some line I couldn't come back from. But I told myself I had no choice. I needed to know what I was dealing with. The 3rd night after setting the trap, I sat on the porch with my rifle across my lap and waited. The moon was half full, casting just enough light to see the outline of the cage in the distance. Around midnight, Rusty started whining again. I shushed him, straining to hear. And then I heard it. Not the knocks this time. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, moving through the field toward the trap. My hands tightened on the rifle. I wanted to turn on the floodlight, but something told me to stay still, to just watch. The shape moved into view. Even from 100 yards away, I could tell it was massive, taller than any man, broader than any bear. It walked upright, arms swinging slightly, head tilted as if it were listening. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was Bigfoot. I don't even like saying it, but that's what it was. The creature approached the trap cautiously, circling it once before moving closer to the bait. I could see its form more clearly now, covered in dark hair, shoulders hunched forward, hands that looked almost human, but larger, thicker. It reached for the apples, and I heard the spring release. The cage door slammed shut. The sound echoed across the field like a gunshot. The creature roared, a sound so deep and primal it made my chest vibrate. It threw itself against the bars, shaking the entire cage. I stood up, rifle forgotten, watching in horror as it fought to get free. And that's when I realized what I'd done. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that it wasn't anything supernatural. Maybe I wanted to feel in control. But I did catch something that night. The trap worked. By morning, the cage was rattling, and when I went to check, I couldn't believe it. Standing there, staring at me, was something huge, like a man, but not. It had this wide, heavy frame, hair matted down with dirt. It looked exhausted, like it had been through hell. And when I saw those eyes, so tired, so worn out, I realized this wasn't some wild animal. I approached slowly, my boots crunching on the frost-covered grass. The creature had stopped fighting by then. It just sat in the cage, hunched over, breathing heavily. Its eyes tracked me as I got closer. Dark, intelligent eyes that held something I hadn't expected. Recognition. Maybe even understanding. It wasn't snarling or trying to attack. It just watched me, waiting. I stopped about 20 feet away, close enough to see the details I'd missed in the dark. The hair was reddish-brown, coarse and thick, covering every inch of its body except the palms of its hands and the soles of its feet. Those were dark, leathery, almost human. Its face was flatter than a gorilla's, but not quite human either. Somewhere in between. And its hands, God, its hands were enormous, with long fingers that gripped the bars of the cage. I stood there, not knowing what to do. What do you do when you catch Bigfoot? Call the authorities? Drag it into town? The thought made me feel sick. This wasn't some trophy to parade around. This was a living being, and I'd trapped it like an animal. The creature shifted, and that's when I noticed its leg. Blood matted the hair around its thigh, dark and dried. It had been wounded, maybe days ago. That's probably why it was taking the crops. It couldn't hunt properly, couldn't move fast enough to catch game. The guilt hit me like a freight train. I'd caught something that was already suffering, already desperate, and now it was trapped, terrified, staring at me like I was the monster. I took a step forward, then another. The creature didn't move. I reached for the latch on the cage, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip it. What if it attacked me the second I opened the door? What if it killed me right there in my own field? But I couldn't leave it. I couldn't do that. I pulled the latch, and the door swung open. The creature didn't move at first. It just sat there, looking at me like it couldn't believe what I'd done. Then, slowly, it stood up. It was even bigger standing, at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. It took one step forward, then another, limping on that injured leg. And then it turned and walked away, back toward the trees. It didn't run. It didn't look back. It just walked, and I watched it go until it disappeared into the forest. I stood there, frozen, heart pounding. I could have closed the cage, kept it locked, but I didn't. I let it go. The Bigfoot, if that's what it was, didn't even fight it. It just turned and walked away, limping. It was only then that I saw the other ones, hiding in the trees. The family. I realized what had been going on all along. This wasn't about stealing. It was survival. Those Bigfoots, they were hungry. They were stealing because they had no other choice, and they'd been hurt. That's when I knew they weren't just animals. They were trying to protect something. The trees rustled, and I saw them emerge. First one, then two more, smaller than the one I'd trapped, moving cautiously toward the edge of the clearing. One looked young, maybe half the size of an adult, staying close to what I assumed was its mother. She was slightly smaller than the male I'd released, her hair lighter in color, almost cinnamon in the early morning light. The third was another adult, moving with the same cautious, deliberate steps. They stood at the tree line, watching me, waiting. The injured one had made it back to them by then, and the mother reached out, touching his shoulder, examining his leg. It was such a human gesture that I felt my throat tighten. These weren't monsters. They were a family that had been driven to my farm out of desperation, out of need, and I'd trapped one of them. I'd hurt them even more. The young one made a soft sound, almost like a whimper, and the mother pulled it closer. They stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes, just watching me, trying to figure out if I was a threat. And then, slowly, they turned and disappeared back into the forest. The injured male looked back once before he followed them, and in that look I saw something I'll never forget. Gratitude, maybe, or just acknowledgement, an understanding that I'd made a choice, and it was the right one. I walked back to the house in a daze. Rusty was waiting on the porch, tail wagging like nothing had happened. But everything had happened. Everything had changed. I sat down on the steps, my rifle leaning against the railing where I'd left it the night before, and I just sat there as the sun came up. The air smelled like pine and dew, and somewhere in the distance I could hear a crow calling. Normal sounds, normal morning, except nothing was normal anymore. I'd seen Bigfoot. I'd trapped a Bigfoot family member and then let him go, and they'd trusted me enough to show themselves, to let me see them all together. That trust felt heavy, like a responsibility I hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. I knew right then that I could never tell anyone, not Sarah, not Tom, not the ranger. This had to stay secret, for their protection, for mine. I didn't tell anyone, not at first, not for weeks. The sheriff came by, asked if I'd seen anything strange, and I lied. I told him no. I wasn't going to tell anyone about what I'd seen. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Those Bigfoots weren't just animals. They were something more. And it hit me then. They were being hunted. I had heard rumors from other people in the area, hunters talking about a crew that had been out there looking for Bigfoot. They didn't care about the creatures. They wanted trophies. The sheriff, Deputy Collins actually, since Sheriff Brennan was dealing with a situation down in Packwood, had shown up on a Tuesday afternoon. He'd gotten a call from someone reporting unusual activity in the area. Strange sounds, missing livestock, standard stuff. I'd invited him in for coffee, and we'd sat at the kitchen table while he asked his questions. Had I noticed anything out of the ordinary? Any signs of bears or cougars? Any disturbances? I'd shaken my head to all of it, keeping my face neutral. The trap was already dismantled, buried in the back of the barn under a tarp. The tracks had been smoothed over by rain. There was no evidence of what had happened. Just my word, and I wasn't giving that. Collins had seemed satisfied, finishing his coffee and heading out with a reminder to call if I saw anything. But his visit had rattled me. Someone else had noticed something. Someone else was paying attention, and that meant the Bigfoots weren't as hidden as they thought. Over the next few weeks, I heard more stories. Tom mentioned that a group of hunters from California had been asking around at the general store, offering money for information about sightings. They had cameras, tracking equipment, all sorts of gear. They weren't your typical recreational hunters. These guys were serious. They were here for one thing, and they weren't leaving until they got it. I thought about the injured male, that wound on his leg. Bullet wound, probably. Someone had already taken a shot at him. Someone had already tried. That's why they'd come to my farm. They were running out of options, running out of safe places, and I'd nearly made things worse by trapping him. The guilt gnawed at me, but so did something else, a protective instinct I hadn't expected. These creatures weren't hurting anyone. They were just trying to survive, trying to stay hidden in a world that kept shrinking around them, and now there were men with guns actively hunting them. I started leaving food out again, not in a trap this time, just at the edge of the field where the trees began. Apples, vegetables, sometimes bread. It was always gone by morning. I never saw them take it, but I knew they were there. I could feel them watching sometimes, especially at night, and I'd hear the knocks occasionally, 3 soft taps in the distance. Not a threat, a greeting maybe, or just acknowledgement. We'd reached an understanding, them and me, and I was determined to keep them safe. The more I thought about it, the more I realized the truth. Those Bigfoots, they were only taking my crops to feed their wounded, to protect their young. They were running from the hunters. That's why they came to my farm. I know how it sounds. I don't expect you to believe me, but it's the truth. They didn't want to hurt anyone. They were scared. And the worst part, I knew I couldn't do anything about it. Not without putting my family in danger. But I couldn't do nothing either. The tension built through October. The California hunters were still around, setting up trail cameras deep in the forest, tracking movements, following prints. I ran into one of them at the hardware store, a tall guy with expensive gear and a cocky attitude. He'd asked me if I'd seen anything unusual on my property. Big animal, walks upright. I'd told him no, kept my face blank, bought my supplies and left. But the encounter had shaken me. These men were getting closer. And if they found the family, if they managed to corner them, someone was going to get hurt. Maybe killed. The thought kept me up at night. I'd lie in bed, listening for the knocks, hoping not to hear them because that meant they were staying away, staying safe. But sometimes I'd hear them anyway, and my heart would sink. One night in late October, something changed. I was out checking the barn, later than usual because one of the goats had been sick. I heard the footsteps before I saw anything, heavy, slow, deliberate. I froze, flashlight in hand, pointing it toward the sound. The injured male stepped into the light. He was alone this time, standing about 30 feet away, just watching me. We stayed like that for a long moment, neither of us moving. And then he did something I'll never forget. He knelt down and placed something on the ground. A stick, woven with dried grass into a crude circle. A gift, an offering. Then he stood up, looked at me one more time, and made a sound. Low, soft, almost like a hum. It rose and fell, melodic in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't aggressive, it was communicative. He was talking to me in his way, thanking me maybe, or asking for help. I took a step forward and he didn't retreat. I knelt down, picked up the woven stick, and held it up so he could see. "I understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I won't let them find you." I don't know if he understood my words, but something passed between us in that moment. An agreement, a bond. He made that humming sound again, softer this time, and then he turned and walked back into the darkness. I stood there holding that woven stick, feeling its weight in my hand, and I knew everything had changed. This wasn't just about keeping quiet anymore. This was about active protection. This was about making sure those hunters never found what they were looking for. And I was willing to do whatever it took. I did something else, something I can never take back. I set another trap, a better one this time. I thought I could stop them from coming back. I thought I could protect myself and my farm. But in the end, it was me who needed protecting. I never saw them again after that, and the guilt has stayed with me. I know I shouldn't have done it. I didn't even really want to trap them anymore. I just wanted to stop the madness. I don't know what happened to that family of Bigfoots, but I know they weren't just the stuff of legends. They were real, and I'm still haunted by what I did. That's not entirely true. I didn't set another trap for them. I set one for the hunters. The California crew had gotten too close. They'd found prints near my property line, and I'd seen them setting up cameras along the trails the Bigfoots used. I couldn't let them get any closer. So I started removing batteries from their cameras, redirecting a few, leading them on false trails deeper into the wilderness, away from the areas where I knew the family stayed. I'd go out at night with wire cutters and snip their trail markers, move their equipment, create confusion. It was risky. If they caught me, there'd be questions I couldn't answer. But I was careful and desperate. The family had moved closer to my property as the hunters pressed in from the east. I could hear them almost every night now. The soft whoops, the occasional knock, the sound of movement through the underbrush. They were running out of space, running out of places to hide, and I was running out of ways to help. In early November, one of the hunters approached me directly. He'd found my boot prints near one of their cameras. He didn't accuse me outright, but the implication was clear. I'd played dumb, said I'd been checking my fence line. He'd stared at me for a long time before nodding and walking away. But I knew I was on borrowed time. That night I heard them for the last time. All 4 of them, moving through the forest behind my property, heading north toward the high country. I stood on the porch and listened to their calls, soft, mournful, fading into the distance. They were leaving, getting out before the hunters closed in, before I could cause them any more trouble. I never heard them again after that. The California hunters left town 2 weeks later, empty-handed and frustrated. Tom told me they'd been complaining about vandalism and false leads. I just nodded and changed the subject. The woven stick is still in my drawer, hidden under some old papers. Sometimes I take it out and look at it. Remember that night. Remember the way he'd looked at me. I'd like to think they made it somewhere safe, somewhere far from hunters and traps and people like me who mean well but don't know what they're doing. But I'll never know for sure. And that's the hardest part. It's been years now. I don't talk about it much. The knocking sound still echoes in my mind sometimes, especially when the wind's right. And I remember that big creature's eyes, the way it just stood there, looking at me like it knew I understood. But there's one thing I can't shake. I still hear 3 knocks sometimes, just out of the blue. I know how it sounds, but it's real. Sarah moved me out of the farm 3 years ago, said I was getting too old to manage it on my own, and she was probably right. I'm in town now, in a small house with neighbors close enough to wave to. No more fields, no more forest pressing in from all sides. It should feel safer, easier. But some nights I wake up at 3 in the morning and I swear I hear them. 3 knocks, soft, distant, but unmistakable. I'll get up, walk to the window, look out at the empty street. Nothing there, just streetlights and parked cars and the occasional dog barking. But I know what I heard. Rusty died the winter after I left the farm. Old age, nothing dramatic. But I still miss him. Miss the way he'd alert me to things I couldn't hear yet. Miss having that connection to the land, to the wild things that moved through it. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there. The family. If they found a safe place in the high country, away from hunters and cameras and curious people. I hope they did. I hope that injured male's leg healed. I hope the young one grew up strong. I hope they're thriving, living the way they were meant to, hidden and safe. Tom still calls sometimes. We don't talk about what happened. We've never spoken about it directly, but there's an understanding between us. He knows I know something, and he respects that I've kept it quiet. Last month he mentioned that someone claimed to have seen something near the old logging road. Big, walking upright, gone before they could get a photo. I just said maybe it was a bear and changed the subject, but my heart had lifted a little hearing that. Maybe they came back sometimes. Maybe they remember. I don't have the footage anymore. I didn't keep it. I couldn't. I couldn't prove any of it to you even if I wanted to. All I have now is this story, the memory, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to make peace with it. But that's the truth. That's what happened. And whatever I saw that night, whatever it was, I know it wasn't something to fear. It was something to respect, a family just trying to survive. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done it. But you have to know, the truth, what I saw, it wasn't what people think. It was real. And it was Bigfoot. 3 soft knocks just now, while I'm recording this. You probably didn't hear them. But I did, and I think that's all the proof I need.